HOA stormed in claiming my lake until they learned I owned every dock under their feet. I knew the HOA was bold, but I never expected them to storm onto my property like they were invading foreign land. The morning it happened, I was standing on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the mist lift off the lake I'd quietly owned for years. That's when I heard shouting sharp, entitled, and way too close to my shoreline. At first, I thought maybe a couple of lost boaters had wandered in again. But then I saw them, a full squad of HOA board members marching down my dock like they were storming the beaches of Normandy, clipboards in hand, fury in their eyes, and their president Linda, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, leading the charge. "You can't just take over our lake," she yelled before her heels even touched the planks. I almost choked on my coffee. They had no idea, not a clue, that I owned not just the lake, but every single dock their overpriced boats were tied to. I had kept that detail quiet. Not because I wanted trouble, but because I knew trouble would eventually come find me. Linda shoved a stack of papers toward me as if she were serving a royal decree. "We voted," she declared. "The HOA will now be enforcing lake access fees, boat permits, and annual dock maintenance charges. Your dock," she jabbed a finger, "is in violation." "My dock?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. She smirked, thinking she had me pinned. "Yes. And unless you pay the fines, we'll have no choice but to take action." Behind her, the board members nodded like obedient pigeons. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't even correct her. Instead, I asked calmly, "Linda, who told you this lake belongs to the HOA?" Her face twisted. "Everyone knows it does. It's always been part of the community." I turned, walked a few steps into my house, and came back with a folder I never expected to use this early, the original land deeds, signed decades before the HOA ever existed. "You mean," I said slowly, opening the folder, "this lake?" Her eyes flickered. Confusion. Then doubt. Then something else, fear. And the board behind her? They froze. Some even backed up, realizing exactly where they were standing. Because the dock beneath their feet, the one they claimed was the HOA's property, was legally, fully, and undeniably mine. But I didn't reveal everything. Not yet. What none of them knew was that these deeds included every dock, ramp, and water access point in the entire neighborhood. And this confrontation? It was only the beginning. Little did I know that this confrontation would unravel a web of entitlement, expose hidden motives inside the HOA's leadership, and set off a chain of events that would push every neighbor to finally choose a side. The next morning, I woke to the sound of engines rumbling down my gravel driveway. Not just one car, three. When I stepped outside, there they were, the HOA board, fully assembled like they were marching into battle. At the front stood Linda, clutching a stack of folders like she was about to serve royal decrees. Behind her were two board members carrying clipboards and measuring wheels, as if they had the authority to inspect federal property. "Good morning," I called out, sipping my coffee casually. "Early for a meeting, isn't it?" Linda didn't waste a second. "We're here to conduct an official HOA perimeter inspection," she announced loudly, waving a paper. "We've had multiple reports that your lake's boundaries are overlapping our community docks." Your lake. Those two words almost made me laugh. "You mean the lake I legally own?" I replied. "And the docks that, we should probably not talk about yet." But Linda was already marching toward the shoreline like she had full jurisdiction. "The HOA has final say on all shared water features," she snapped. "And any resident refusing compliance will face fines." Ah! There it was. The real motive. Money. I followed behind them as they stormed down the path. They spread out across the docks, checking measurements like they were surveying a kingdom they believed was theirs. For a moment, I let them enjoy their fantasy. Then a white truck pulled up. A tall man stepped out, the county surveyor. clipboard, rolled blueprints, and a look of someone who took his job, and boundaries, extremely seriously. Linda froze. "Who is that?" she demanded. I smiled. "The person who's going to answer all your questions." The surveyor unfolded an enormous map of the lake, weighted its corners with rocks, and cleared his throat. Within seconds, the HOA board gathered around like school children waiting for test scores. He pointed to a bold line on the map. "This," he said, "is the property boundary." Then he dragged his finger around the whole shoreline, outlining the entire lake and every single dock attached to it. "All of this," he concluded, "is owned by one person." He turned and pointed directly at me. The look on Linda's face. Shock. Confusion. Then pure outrage. "That can't be right," she barked. "Those docks were built by HOA residents." The surveyor shrugged. "Built illegally. On someone else's property. Which technically right now, makes every person standing on those docks a trespasser." The board members looked down at the wooden planks beneath their feet. Suddenly, they weren't so eager to stand there anymore. The moment the surveyor declared the HOA trespassers, the board members practically hopped off the docks like they'd stepped onto hot coals. But Linda predictably refused to accept defeat. She marched right up to me, her finger stabbing the air between us like she was issuing a royal ultimatum. "You can't just claim the lake," she snapped. "We've maintained these docks for years. We've paid for them. That gives us rights." "Actually," I said calmly, "it gives you a history of using someone else's property without permission." The surveyor nodded matter-of-factly. "And that's called encroachment." Linda shot him a glare that could have cracked glass. "We're not removing anything," she barked. "These docks stay where they are." I chuckled. "That's the thing, Linda. I haven't asked you to remove anything." I paused long enough for her to relax for half a second. "Yet." Her face tightened again. I continued, "But since they're on my property, here's what's going to happen. I'm giving the HOA 48 hours to either sign a lease agreement for dock use, or remove every structure from the lake." The conflicting emotions on the board's faces were priceless. The timid board member, Tom, whispered, "Lease, like paying him." Linda whipped around. "We are not paying him a single cent." But the others weren't so sure. One of them quietly asked, how much would the lease be?" Linda turned red, steam practically rising from her ears. "We don't negotiate with rule breakers." I laughed. "You entered my property today. So tell me who's breaking rules." She spun on her heel and stormed off, shouting, "We'll call the county. We'll get lawyers. You'll regret this." And with that meltdown, the HOA board retreated like defeated troops. But the real chaos began later that afternoon. My phone buzzed with constant messages from neighbors, screenshots of the HOA group chat, where Linda was spiraling fast. She wrote paragraphs in all caps. "He thinks he can steal our lake. We built those docks. He's trying to extort us with leases. And then the kicker. We need to rally every resident tomorrow. Show force." Residents started pushing back. "Wait, is the lake actually his? If he owns the shoreline, we're trespassing." "Linda, did you even check the paperwork?" The chat broke into factions. Team Linda. Team Logic. And Team Why are we even paying HOA fees? By sunset, the HOA wasn't just angry. They were split and I hadn't lifted a finger. But the best part? I still had one final piece of information they didn't know. And that secret was going to change everything. By the next morning, the HOA's show of force looked more like a confused garage sale than an organized protest. Residents gathered near the docks holding mismatched signs, some angry, some unsure, some clearly coerced by Linda. A few signs didn't even make sense. One said save our water rights while another read stop lake theft. If only they knew. I walked down to the shoreline with a folder tucked under my arm. That alone made Linda narrow her eyes like a hawk spotting prey. She strutted toward me with the self-importance of someone who thinks volume equals authority. We're here to inform you, she announced theatrically, that the HOA rejects your absurd demands. We don't accept your fake ownership claim, and we will not pay any lease fees. The residents stand with us. Behind her, half the residents instantly looked away. I smiled politely. Before we get into speeches, I'd like to clear up a few things. For everyone. I opened the folder. These, I said, holding up the first set of documents, are county land records from 42 years ago. They show that the lot you all consider community property was subdivided incorrectly. The shoreline, including the docks, was never transferred to the HOA ever. Gasps. Whispering. A few people stepped back like the papers were radioactive. And these, I continued, lifting a second set, are the updated ownership reports the county clerk emailed me yesterday. They confirm the same thing. Linda snorted. Forged. Obviously. I turned one page and displayed a large, embossed county seal. If you think I forged a county seal, you might want to rethink this whole rally. Even her loyal board members visibly deflated. But I wasn't finished. I held up a third, thinner document. And this, I said, is my favorite part. I unfolded it slowly for dramatic effect. It's a formal notice of liability. Since your docks are on my land without permission, I am not responsible for injuries, property damage, or accidents that occur on them. You are. A couple of residents instantly stepped off the docks like they were standing on a ticking bomb. One man shouted, "Linda, you told us the HOA owned all this." Another woman demanded, "If he owns the lakefront, why are we paying HOA fees for it?" The crowd turned into a storm, anger, confusion, betrayal aimed not at me, but at Linda. She sputtered, "He's manipulating you. This is a trap." "No," I said calmly. "But this last document? This one is for you, Linda." I handed her an envelope. She tore it open and her jaw dropped. It was a bill. A dock lease bill. For every year the HOA had used my property. And the total? Enough to bankrupt their entire operation. The crowd erupted. And I just stood there, smiling, as the HOA collapsed under the truth. Linda stood frozen with the invoice in her trembling hands, her eyes scanning the total again and again as if the number might magically shrink. It didn't. It stayed right there, bold, undeniable, and devastating. The crowd behind her fell silent, watching her unravel in real time. It was the quietest they had been all morning. Finally, she sputtered, This can't be legal." "Oh, it's legal," I said gently. "You trespassed without knowing it. Now you're being billed for the years of use. In some cases, that's considered back rent." Her knees wobbled. Her board members whispered among themselves, each one suddenly realizing the gravity of what she had dragged them into. One of them, a shorter man with silver hair, stepped forward and asked timidly, "Can we negotiate this?" I shrugged. "Sure. But the lakefront rights and the docks still belong to me unless you have a counter document that says otherwise." They didn't. Linda didn't. No one did. That was the moment everything shifted. The residents weren't angry at me anymore, they were angry at the woman who had led them straight into a financial disaster. Voices rose, accusing, frustrated, finally free to express what they had clearly held back for years. "You said everything on this lake was ours. You never checked. You made us pay HOA fees for something he owns. Oh my God, we could have been sued." Linda backed away, hands up, as if trying to shield herself from the incoming storm. But the damage was already done. One resident, a mom with two kids tugging at her sleeves, walked up to me. "Sir, if we remove the docks ourselves, does that clear the debt?" I nodded. "Yes. If you clear everything within the deadline, I'll waive all back rent. But the HOA needs to make it official." The board pounced on the lifeline. They huddled around Linda, whispering urgently, and after several tense minutes, she signed the agreement with a bitter scowl. Her signature shook across the page. The crowd sighed in relief. Some even thanked me. Within hours, people began dismantling the docks, laughing, joking, reclaiming ownership of their own choices. It wasn't anger anymore. It was freedom. Linda, meanwhile, walked away with her shoulders slumped and her reputation shattered. The board announced an emergency vote to remove her. By sunset, her reign was over. I sat on a folding chair by the water, watching the lake return to its natural, quiet state. For the first time since I'd moved in, the place felt like mine. The view was clear. The drama was gone. The water was still. My lake finally, undeniably mine. The morning after the docks were dismantled felt strangely peaceful, quiet waves tapping the shoreline, birds skimming the surface, and no HOA members lurking around with clipboards. But peace, I quickly learned, wasn't the same as closure. And the final chapter of the saga hadn't been written yet. Around noon, I received a knock at my door. When I opened it, 3 board members stood there, not Linda, of course. She was probably still recovering from her public meltdown. Tom, the timid board member who had questioned her the most, stepped forward with a hesitant smile. "We, have something to tell you," he said. "The residents held a vote last night." I raised a brow. "About what?" "The HOA," he replied. "Specifically whether or not we wanted to continue existing." That caught my attention. "And the result?" He took in a deep breath. 78% voted to dissolve it entirely. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. This HOA, the same one that stormed my property claiming rights over something they never owned, was completely collapsing. Not because I forced it, but because the residents finally saw the truth. Tom handed me a folder. "This is the formal dissolution agreement. All we need is your acknowledgement, since part of the boundary error was tied to our supposed lake rights." I flipped through the pages. Everything was legitimate. Clean. Final. The HOA that once believed it controlled everything around the lake was now barely hanging onto its last shred of authority. And even that shred was about to vanish. Before signing, I asked, "What will you do now? Without the HOA?" He shrugged, but his smile deepened. "Honestly? Live. Enjoy the neighborhood. Help each other without being fined for paint colors or mailbox heights." He paused. People are relieved. They didn't realize how bad it had become. I nodded. I understood that more than he knew. After signing the acknowledgement, Tom shook my hand firmly. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the docks thing, but for making us finally look at what was happening." They left with lighter steps than they'd arrived. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the lake. The docks were gone, leaving the water clear and open. The sunset cast long gold reflections across the surface. It looked free. Then, I noticed something: families sitting along the shore, kids skipping stones, neighbors chatting without tension. No HOA patrols. No shouting. No power games. Just a community being a community again. As I stood there, the last message from Tom popped up on my phone. HOA officially dissolved. Linda removed permanently. Enjoy your lake. For the first time since moving in, I felt the weight lift completely. No HOA. No threats. No confusion. Just me. My land. My lake. And a neighborhood finally able to breathe again. Even after the HOA dissolved and the lake finally felt like mine, a part of me still sensed there was something unfinished, some missing piece hiding beneath the years of confusion, mismanagement, and Linda's power trips. That nagging feeling wouldn't go away. And then, one quiet morning, it arrived. A letter. A real, paper envelope yellowed at the edges, sealed with an old-fashioned embossed stamp. It was addressed to me by name, but the return address belonged to the previous owner of my property. A man I'd never met. A man who had passed away years ago. Inside the envelope was a single key, and a note. If they come for the lake, look in the boathouse. Everything you need is there. Harold Whitcomb. Harold Whitcomb. The man whose family originally owned the entire shoreline. I didn't waste a second. I went straight to the old boathouse at the water's edge, the one I'd barely touched since moving in. The structure creaked as I stepped inside, dust floating in thin beams of morning light. I found the old padlock on a narrow storage door in the back. The key slid in perfectly. Inside was a metal lockbox, heavy and cold. When I opened it, I wasn't prepared for what I found. Maps. Surveys. Ledgers. Old HOA meeting minutes from before the HOA even formed. And at the very bottom, a handwritten journal. Harold's journal. I sat on the boathouse bench and began reading. What I learned made everything that had happened suddenly make sense. Decades ago, Harold discovered the same boundary mistake I had long before the county updated records. He'd tried to correct it. He'd confronted the early founders of what would eventually become the HOA. But instead of fixing the error, the early board members ignored it, and then slowly rewrote the community narrative until everyone believed the lake was shared HOA property. Page after page detailed their manipulation, their fear that Harold could revoke access at any time, and their desperate attempt to keep residents unaware. It wasn't malice at first, just incompetence. But over the years, it grew into control. Then power. Then tradition. By the time Linda took over, she blindly inherited a lie and enforced it like gospel. Then came the final shock. Inside a small envelope tucked into the back of the journal was a notarized legal document. It stated, "In the event of my death, full lakefront rights and dock usage privileges transfer permanently to the owner of parcel 11A. Under no circumstance shall the HOA, present or future, claim any portion of the lake." Parcel 11A. My parcel. Harold had planned for all of this. Every incident. Every challenge. Every misunderstanding. It was all part of a history no one bothered to uncover. Until now. When I finished reading, I closed the journal slowly, realizing the lake had never just been mine. It was meant to be mine. And finally, the story had come full circle. News travels fast in small neighborhoods. But shocking news. That spreads like wildfire. By the next morning, whispers about Harold's old documents had already made their way through half the community, and apparently, right into the ears of the one person who absolutely couldn't let it go. Linda. I was sipping coffee on my porch when her silver SUV screeched to a stop in front of my house. She stepped out, hair frizzed, eyes blazing with the kind of determination that only someone who refuses to accept defeat could possess. "We need to talk," she barked before I even stood up. I set my cup down calmly. "I assumed you'd be avoiding me after the vote." Her jaw tightened. "I heard you've been spreading lies about the HOA's past." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And which lies are those?" "That the HOA never owned the lake," she snapped. "That the founding board hid documents. That some dead man magically passed you rights." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked inside, retrieved Harold's journal and the notarized transfer document, and handed them to her. "Read," I said simply. She hesitated, probably expecting forged papers, dramatic claims, or something she could easily dismiss. But as she flipped through the pages, her expression slowly fell apart. First came confusion. Then denial. Then something I had never seen in her before. Fear. This says the HOA knew, she whispered. It says the founders knew, I corrected. They covered it up, never corrected the records, and passed the lie down to every board after them. Her eyes darted over the notarized page again and again. And this signature, this is from the county clerk, she said quietly, voice trembling. Yes, I answered. Which means the lake was never HOA property. Ever. For a moment, Linda didn't speak. She just stared at the paper, the truth sinking in deeper than any argument I could have made. Finally, she closed the journal and looked at me, not with anger this time, but with something like remorse. No. Not remorse. Just defeat. I thought I was protecting this neighborhood, she said softly. You were protecting a mistake, I replied. One that had already grown roots before you ever joined the board. She took a long breath, shoulders falling. Are you going to expose all this? Publicly? I shook my head. No. The HOA is dissolved. The residents are free. There's no reason to dig up a scandal that started before any of them were born. She blinked, surprised. You're just letting it go. I'm letting them move on, I said. She swallowed hard, nodded once, and quietly handed back the documents. Then, without another word, she walked to her SUV, got in, and drove away. It was the first time I'd ever seen Linda leave without a fight. The truth had done something no argument ever could. It finally silenced her. For a few weeks, life around the lake finally settled into something resembling normal. No HOA patrols. No surprise inspections. No tense neighbor standoffs over mailbox heights or lawn edges. People seemed lighter, almost cheerful, even. But peaceful quiet never lasts long in small towns. One afternoon, I received an unexpected email from the local council. Community meeting scheduled, topic, lakefront ownership and future use. Apparently, the dissolution of the HOA and the rumors about Harold's documents had reached the town council. And now they wanted a full public discussion. Part of me hoped I could avoid it, but I knew better. In situations like this, silence only invites more questions. When I arrived at the old town hall that evening, the parking lot was overflowing. Inside, residents filled every seat, with more lining the walls. The air buzzed with curiosity, anxiety, and underneath it all a sense of anticipation. At the front, the council chair, Ms. Harper, tapped the microphone. Thank you all for coming. Due to recent developments regarding the lake boundary, we'll be hearing from the involved parties tonight. I knew exactly whose name would come next. First, we invite the lakefront owner, Mr. Daniels. The murmurs swelled as I stepped forward. I took a breath, unfolded Harold's journal, and addressed the room. Most of you already know the recent events with the HOA, I began. What many don't know is that this confusion started decades before any of us lived here. People leaned forward. I explained everything: Harold's discovery of the boundary error, the founding board's failure to correct it, the gradual passing down of misinformation, and the document that transferred lake rights directly to the owner of my parcel. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Then Ms. Harper asked, so what does this mean for the town's future use of the lake? This was the moment everyone held their breath for. I let the question linger before answering. It means the lakefront is mine legally, I said. But I'm not here to take it away from anyone. I'm here to give something back. A ripple of surprise traveled across the room. I'm drafting a community lake access agreement, I continued. Free access for residents. No fees. No HOA. No restrictions except basic safety rules and respect for the property. Families should be able to enjoy the water without fear of fines or power trips. Gasps. Smiles. A few tears. Someone shouted, "Bless you, man." Another person yelled, finally, sanity. But then, a familiar voice echoed from the doorway. You're making a mistake. Everyone turned. Linda stood there, arms crossed, face pale but eyes burning. You have no idea what you're inviting by giving people free access, she said coldly. You think the HOA was bad? Wait until you see what happens without rules. The room tensed again. The drama, it seemed, wasn't over yet. Linda's voice sliced through the town hall like a cold blade, freezing the energy that had been warm and hopeful only seconds earlier. People shifted uneasily in their seats, some rolling their eyes, others bracing for another confrontation. I turned toward her calmly. Linda, you're welcome to speak. But the HOA is dissolved. You don't represent anyone anymore. Her jaw tightened. I represent experience. And I'm telling you, giving people unlimited access to a lake without rules will destroy everything. You're asking for chaos. Trash, noise, parties, accidents. You're not a community manager. You're just a new homeowner with a deed and a dream. Her words stirred a few uncertain murmurs. But I wasn't rattled. Not anymore. I didn't say no rules, I replied. I said no HOA-style rules. No fines. No harassment. Just basic respect and cooperation. Linda's eyes flashed. Respect? Cooperation. These people, she gestured around the room, don't know what that looks like without someone enforcing it. A man in the front row stood up. We don't need you enforcing anything. Another resident chimed in. You fined me $50 for leaving a kayak on the shoreline for one night. Linda ignored them and stepped closer to me, lowering her voice but not her hostility. You're making promises you can't keep. One problem, one accident, one conflict, and they'll turn on you just like they turned on me. I met her glare head on. That's the difference between us, Linda. You used control. I'm offering trust. The council chair intervened. Ms. Robinson, unless you have constructive input, please take your seat. But Linda wasn't finished. You all think he's some hero, she spat, but mark my words, this will fall apart. And when it does, don't come crawling back asking for structure. With that, she turned sharply and stormed out of the building, the door crashing shut behind her. The room exhaled collectively. Ms. Harper cleared her throat. Thank you, Mr. Daniels. The council will review your access agreement. The meeting adjourned, and residents surrounded me with gratitude, questions, and relief. But as the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, something heavy settled inside me. Linda wasn't entirely wrong. Trust was beautiful but fragile. And as fate would have it, her prediction wasn't far off. Because 2 weeks later, a violent storm swept through the region, winds hitting 50 miles an hour, rain pounding the lake, trees cracking, docks collapsing into the water. When I stepped outside the next morning, the shoreline looked like a battlefield. Debris. Branches. Ruined kayaks. Half a floating deck wedged against my boathouse. The lake had taken a beating. And people were already panicking. Linda's warning echoed in my mind. The real test of my idea had just begun.